Hey everyone, Sean and Dave here from the Saturday Mourning Cartoons podcast. We cannot start this episode. We can absolutely not start this episode without thanking the following people who went to our patreon.com and support the show. So thank you,
Bill Dixon,
Fangirly,
Jack Connolly,
Alex Kazanis,
Derek Haynes,
Melanie Harker,
Dr. Jason Woods,
Allison Keene,
Battle Mat Fitness,
Westbourne East Bred,
John Richard Helter II,
Dave Trumbord III.
damn it, again, and the one and only Sean Paul Ellis. Hey, listeners out there, if you want to get on this list of super cool people, we'd love it if you'd head on over to patreon.com/Saturday Mourning Cartoons, remember that's morning with a U, to see how you can support the podcast.
Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for your support. And now, on with the show. Hello, and welcome to Saturday Mourning Cartoons, the weekly podcast that revisits, reviews, and ridicules some of the world's weirdest animated series. Coming to you ringside with colorful commentary, I'll be your announcer, Sean Paul Ellis. And seated next to me this evening, and bringing all of the king-sized carnage, we have wrestler turned commentator, Tony Lazzeroni. Tony, how's it going?
You puny human. What do you think you're bringing to this podcast? Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing great, man. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Always a good time.
Absolutely. No, we are very excited. This is the last episode that we have for Listener Appreciation Month.
Woo-hoo.
And we are closing this out with a bang, Tony. So I am pumped.
Yeah.
And today's suggestion comes from Cody on Instagram, our buddy Cody. He asked us the question, does Celebrity Deathmatch meet the qualifications for Saturday Mourning Cartoons? No recommended episode. That show was so crazy, any episode y'all would choose would be nuts. They all seem to have pretty decent scores on IMDb. Cody, guess what, friend? It does meet the qualification for Saturday Mourning.
Absolutely. This is animation. Claymation is a form of animation, so that absolutely qualifies.
100%. So we have dug into Celebrity Deathmatch tonight. Man, what a crazy show. I want to start this out, Tony, by sort of asking, this was at a really interesting and particular time. MTV in the late 90s, it felt like it was king. Like, this was the prime sweet spot that I remember for MTV.
Yeah.
Still had a lot of music videos. They were also beginning to kind of dabble a lot with, different reality television series that they had. We had Road
Rules, Real World, all that stuff started to take over, kind of went nuts. They
Exactly.
tried out, when did the Teen Mom thing come out? 16 and Pregnant or whatever it was.
I mean, Tony, teen moms have been around forever.
Yes, that much I am aware of. But
Oh, you mean when did we start capitalizing and taking advantage of them and putting them on reality television shows?
yes. When did that happen?
I think that was early 2000s.
Okay.
I think
Which overlaps. This
Yeah.
98. This one started and bridged over, and then had a revival too, which I'm sure we're going to
Yikes.
bring up a little later on.
And then had an almost third revival after that, which we'll get a chance to talk about, which
Oof.
was bananas for this show to have that type of longevity.
Yeah.
Given the fact that really this is a lawyer nightmare.
Yeah.
This show.
This is just a lawsuit, walking lawsuit waiting to happen. That's what this entire show is.
I loved in one of the episodes that you had recommended that we watched for tonight. I love that there was a moment where they make a terrible comment and then they just show a lawyer in his office with a disclaimer, and then the lawyer has a noose that is hung in front of him and he is just staring at it the entire time. I thought, wow, this is
Very
biting.
dark. Very
It's
dark.
Very dark. I'm on board with it. Very, very surprisingly dark. But I wanted to ask, what was late 90s? This was also not just MTV, but I want to say societally, this was a point in time when I feel like wrestling had been very popular for the 80s and the early 90s, but we had a lot of really specific characters that were coming into the wrestling ring at this point that have sort of set up dynasties,
Right.
that have kind of set up these crazy legacies that we have Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Degeneration X. What was your relationship around this time with wrestling?
So at the time, I was kind of I was divorced from wrestling for a good long while. I was one of those, Hulkamaniacs like early '90s. So
Yeah.
I was a big fan then, and then I kind of grew out of it. But then my junior or senior year of high school, I was in an economics class, and I wound up doing a project that this was when WCW and WWF were merging together to
Right.
form WWE. But they were basically absorbing it in, and it was interesting to me because it was actually a financial merger of two big businesses. But then there was this storyline that had to have some continuity to go along with that, and so
Right.
that they would play out effectively some of the boardroom antics, but they would play it out on the world stage of this televised live show in some cases. And so I got back into it in, I think, about 2001. So I was aware of those characters because they would market the hell out of Stone Cold Steve Austin and all those. But I really got back into it right around that time of that merger. And the other thing that was interesting about the show, I did a little research, of course, because why the hell not? And most of really the only people that got to represent themselves on this show, other
Okay.
than Mills Lane, were wrestlers. So
Right.
whenever there's a wrestler on this show, it is the actual like actor, wrestler, whatever you want to call them, it's the performer playing themselves. But any other character that's on here, save for a couple small examples, are usually other artists pretending to do the voice of whatever
Right.
character. So very seldom did people get to play themselves, other than wrestlers all got to do it.
I just love the fact that you got into this show because of mergers and acquisitions. I've never had anybody say, I got back into wrestling, for the legal ramifications of what they were doing.
But it's exactly what happened.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
I will say on some subconscious level, I think it was probably that was my justification for doing something that I sort of probably wanted to do anyways. But I like that. That's truly what got me into it. Now, I've never actually been to one of the live events or anything like that. I have friends that are huge fans that will like I've had at least one invitation this year for WrestleMania. Like, you want to come watch WrestleMania at my place? I'm like, when is that? They were like, okay, you don't want to come. You don't know that. I got snobbed out of WrestleMania.
Oh
But
man. I have kind of a weird, I feel like I have a long standing relationship with wrestling
Mhm.
because as a kid in the early 90s, I watched a lot of Saved by the Bell
Yeah.
with character AC Slater, who was, pretty buff, pretty good with the ladies.
Yeah.
And I was transitioning into middle school at this point, and I hit that weird ugly duck phase where I got braces and glasses within about a 8-month period,
Nice.
and then jumped into 6th grade and thought to myself, oh no, what's going on here? So watching that on Saved by the Bell, I thought, I want to wrestle. And we had a wrestling team for 7th and 8th graders. So I
Mhm.
joined and promptly got my ass kicked for 2 solid years. But still enjoyed it, and it
Yeah.
was interesting, and it was the first time that I said to myself, this is a sporting event that I want to participate. Like I will willingly and knowingly do this
Mm.
every day and get into it. So I did have fun with it. And then I stopped in the 8th grade, and it became something where a friend of mine in high school, like you were kind of saying, like during that whole point when there was the merger and acquisition phase and
Yeah.
all of these really colorful characters were coming on to WWF and WCW, and the merger was happening, he had one of those cable boxes in his basement that he could get free pay-per-view all the time, or
Yeah.
his dad, I guess, was paying for free pay-per-view. And so we would always go over, and he would just put on whatever SummerSlam or a wrestling event was on during that time, and we just watch it. And it became like a cool thing. And all the catchphrases from wrestling during that time permeated into sort of the high school zeitgeist that we had.
Right.
So people would walk around and they'd make the X and you go, suck it. And so that became a regular reoccurring thing. And if you didn't have that knowledge, you felt left out
Yeah.
of what was going on. Plus, it was super kind of fun to see sort of these, as you mentioned, like performers and athletes just kind of do these crazy things. Like I used to love watching the Undertaker versus Mick Foley match, the cage match that they did. I kept thinking and watching at points, this can't be scripted. Like he is really jumping off the top of this cage. He could really injure himself and die.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was bonkers to me. And I liked every moment of it. And then it was weird because like right before I graduated, there was just like a switch that just like immediately turned back off. And I've lived my life for X amount of years with really not watching any wrestling whatsoever.
Yeah. And it's easy to drift away from, but it's funny how many people I know that have gotten into it at some point in time in their life, ironically, and then wind up being legitimate fans after not too long and just being like, fuck the world. This is the thing that I'm into now. This is my life. I am a wrestling fan.
I want to say that I believe that wrestling is something that in some cases is it's like anything else in life.
Mm-hmm.
It's shared. It's better if it's shared with somebody that you know.
Right.
And I think that like, you and me, if we had somebody that was in our friend group that was a WrestleManiac that wanted to really get into it, that was like a super fan, we would probably become one by association, or like I don't think you'd have to twist my arm far to be like, oh yeah, I'll definitely come and watch WrestleMania with you.
We've come close because we've been to Super Art Fight, which is something that happens around the DC area there. That friend of the show, Alex Kazanis, is current champion. Does he still hold the crown?
He just lost it. He just lost it.
2 Drink Alex goes down.
Yeah. If anybody's not familiar with it, Super Art Fight is a art battle that they have that's in the DC and Baltimore area where you will pit. It's sort of like a wrestling match where you will pit either a one-on-one or a tag team match. You have a giant canvas and you get a prompt and you continue to draw on the canvas, and then they measure it by crowd participation and applause at the end. It's awesome.
And it has the pageantry of an actual wrestling match, like down to the point where these people, not only do they create costumes, but they will do full-out cosplay. Like some of the guys will build these like crazy built-out costumes and mechanical arms, and it's so impressive, and it's something that they do on a regular basis. They also occasionally do tour with it, so it is something that may come to a city near you. So if you see something about Super Art Fight, go check it out. It's a ton of fun. We're not actually sponsored by them in any way, shape, or form. This is just a little tangent because it's like wrestling.
But guess what? Speaking of sponsors and wrestling and being greased up, we have a sponsor this month, Tony.
Oh yeah, who's that?
Yeah, it's a sexy sponsor. And to learn a little bit more about it, we are going to toss this over to our good buddy Bobby Anthem to learn more about this month's sponsor. Bobby, what's going on?
Hey, SMC listeners. Bobby Anthem here to tell you about our first sponsorship with Spunk Lube. Yeah, that's right, Spunk Lube. Look, we know you're listening to a podcast about cartoons, but let's be honest, you're not a kid anymore. So when you've got adult things going on, reach for Spunk Lube. Our SMC listeners have a chance to get lucky and win a free sample of Spunk Lube. But right now, everybody can get some of this special offer. Go to spunklube.com and use the offer code SMC at checkout to get 10% off any order. That's spunklube.com and use the code SMC for 10% off your order. Now, on with the show.
Always the best to hear from Bobby. Thank you, friend. Appreciate everything you're doing.
I wish my voice was half as deep as that guy's.
It is something that I think about every day. Oh man. So if you are not familiar with Celebrity Deathmatch that we're talking about tonight, let me give you a little bit of history. Let's get into this a little bit. So Celebrity Deathmatch started out on MTV's Cartoon Sushi, which is the spiritual successor of Liquid Television. 2 television pilots were broadcast on MTV on January 1st and 25th of 1998. The series proper premiered on May 14th of 1998 and ended for the first time October 20th, 2002, airing for a total of 75 episodes. Deathmatch 98, which premiered on January 25th of 1998, which was after Super Bowl 32. It was a part of MTV's Super Bowl 32 halftime special. Just 3 months later, Celebrity Deathmatch had entered into MTV's main lineup. The show was popular enough that show creator Eric Fogel was named to be one of the most creative people in the TV industry by Entertainment Weekly. During the next 4 seasons, Celebrity Deathmatch became more popular in other countries and gained viewers from all over the world. But 4 seasons and 75 episodes later, in 2002, MTV decided to cancel the show. Early in 2003, a film based on the series was announced by MTV to be in production, but the project was then canceled later that year. During the same year, in 2003, they also released a video game for PlayStation, PS2, Xbox, and Windows on October 14th of 2003 that was created by Gotham Games.
Oh, yeah.
I never played that. I want to go find out and see what that looks like.
I got to mess around with it on what was it? Somebody's PlayStation 2 at one point in time, and it's
okay.
It's a missable event.
That's kind of what my thought was.
Yeah.
New episodes of the show, which began production in 2005, were produced by Cup of Coffee Studios, as opposed to MTV's now defunct animation department. The show featured an all-new voice cast and a new look. Johnny, Nick, and Mills Lane returned, albeit with new voices. Mills Lane, who was played by himself originally, was then played by Chris Edgerly due to the real-life Mills Lane, who suffered a stroke in 2002. During the 2006 season, fans were able to vote on MTV2.com for future matches by choosing one of 3 matches or by sending in write-in requests. However, due to the cancellation of the second part of the show, these matches would never come to fruition. In April 2015, just a couple years ago, MTV2 announced a reboot for the show on their Twitter account. Later that year, on November 2nd, 2016, Eric Fogel confirmed via Twitter that production of the reboot had been stopped for unknown reasons and the pilot would not be going forward.
Sadness.
So that brings us to current day 2018, where I guarantee that this show will probably be rebooted in 2020 at some point.
At some point in time. And it is, I mean, I would especially think with all the political crap, like it's ripe for it, you know?
Yeah.
That you could easily bring this show back and have, you know, the SmackDown fight that everyone wants to see portrayed in there, and just be, you know, have to deal with as many litigious issues as you did with the original.
I mean, this show is so perfect for satire and parody, and I don't know. It's weird. It's bizarre. It's super violent. We should mention this is a super violent show.
It is the most animated blood I've seen in a good long while. And it's because it's claymation blood. It's like, you know, chunks. Everything is chunks.
Everything looks like Gallagher smashing a watermelon, which will be relevant for our discussion tonight.
Very much so. Yes.
Ugh, yikes. But if you're not familiar with sort of what this show is about, what the point of the show, Tony, can you break it down for us?
I can indeed. Celebrity Deathmatch is an American stop-motion animated series created by Eric Fogel. Not to be misconstrued with Jared Fogel. That's something completely different.
Oh, yikes.
And that was for MTV. A parody of sports entertainment program, Celebrity Deathmatch depicts various celebrities engaging in highly stylized professional wrestling matches. Highly stylized.
That is very generous.
The series is known for its large amount of bloody violence, including combatants employing different abilities and weapons to deliver particularly brutal attacks, resulting in exaggerated physical injuries.
Ooh, and we are going to close out our discussion tonight with one of these particularly brutal attacks that is including different abilities, which was so unbelievably gross and unnecessary. But I feel like that's something that you could only get with Celebrity Deathmatch.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Man, all right. As always, let's jump into Celebrity Deathmatch, and let's begin, of course, with our theme song. Tony, as our guest, what were your thoughts and feelings about the theme song or the lack thereof?
It has theme music, not necessarily a theme song. Because it very much gets like professional wrestling. The theme is the two hosts. That is the recurring piece. That there's always a lead in with like graphics coming up on the screen. And then this really heavy metal guitar riff that's just going on constantly underneath. And it's one of those riffs that I hadn't thought about it in years, but as soon as I heard it reviewing this show earlier this week, like I was like, oh fuck, I remember how much I love that. And that tied me into the movie Dodgeball. Where they have the and they really set that one up because they have kind of the two same voice characters of the two announcers for the dodgeball matches, And the music in that was actually done by Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine. He did the one for Dodgeball, and it just
Oh, really?
and it made me want to go try and dig up. I haven't had a chance to go see if I can figure out who did the riff for this one. It's probably not Morello because it doesn't sound like him, but I'm sure it's somebody.
But
Like-
either way, it's a bold move, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off.
Exactly. That's the Nick Diamond character. And then, yeah. I mean, it's very much they follow that arc of having the color commentary man and the play by play.
Right.
And it's excellent how they put that together. And it really, it's not a theme song, but you instantly know Celebrity Deathmatch as soon as you hear the first 20 seconds of it.
that as you mentioned, that guitar riff that like
Yeah.
yeah. It is
exactly.
exactly. Yeah. I love the fact that this show has to open up with such a long disclaimer.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, we had been receiving sort of disclaimers, for years from shows like South Park,
And
saying
and things
exactly.
like that. Disclaimers at the top.
Saying that the names are used fictitiously, which is crazy to me because that still means that you're using actual names of real people who exist. You're just using them in a fictitious manner. And they have to actually state that it does not reflect the view or opinion of any actual person portrayed, which, again, it's still kind of slanderous.
Yeah.
For a part. But the language here is great. And then it finishes out this disclaimer by saying, anyway, it's just clay.
Yeah. It's not real.
Yeah, it's just clay. You get that really kind of chunky 80s guitar riff that comes in with the cloud with the crowd cheering in the background, so the
yeah.
And then the guitar, and then you get right into the action, because I will say, in these rare instances where we don't have an actual traditional theme song, this show wants to drop you right into the action anyway. They don't want to dance around. There are enough theatrics in this show already that it almost does the program a disservice to have more theatrics and build up. You just want to get into the fight. You just want to get to the meat of this show, which is bonkers.
Yeah.
For as much as I would say, or probably slam most cartoons for not giving us an introduction or a roll call into the characters, as you were saying, Johnny Gomez comes right in and does an intro, or Nick Diamond.
You get an intro that's on par with any podcast or anything like that. I mean, the way that you guys start the podcast show here, there's a little bit of theme music and then straight into y'all introducing the show, and you get the same thing from Celebrity Deathmatch. So it's an effective theme. It is a customized theme in that regard. That every theme, every entry theme is unique for that given episode, which you don't typically get from cartoons. Usually you get a clip assembly of random stuff that has nothing to do with the episode, or random things that they shoehorn into episodes later and looks terrible, and or possibly even produce 4 different episodes out of.
Yeah. I mean, very, very rarely do you get that dedicated animation,
right,
and great theme song that does all these things that I am so critical of every week, such as a roll call, whether it's a visual introduction of those characters or actually saying the characters' names,
right.
Having that dedicated animation, having an actual catchy earworm theme song. This is all stuff that's going to be in my thesis statement when I finally get around to applying to cartoon college. Which I'm pretty sure is an annex of San Francisco City College.
Yes.
That's a callback from about 100 episodes ago.
Yes. And on top of that, we both have t-shirts for San Francisco City College because I found them online and got you one.
I wore mine yesterday.
I think mine is sitting in the thing behind me. Oh yeah. There's my San Francisco City College
Perfect.
t-shirt.
The best.
Or rather, City College of San Francisco is the real one, but
yeah, we're close enough with it.
It's the
there.
same school. It's the school.
Any final thoughts, Tony, about the theme song? Or our introduction?
I'm a fan of this theme. I think it's succinct, and they use it in a Seinfeldian manner. That it comes in and out throughout every single, when you go to break, when you come back from break, there's always the theme bits that go along with it. They when they're doing the closeout of the show, it fades in. I mean, it's an effective theme that is aptly used throughout
Right.
the series.
They definitely got their money's worth for that particular guitar riff
Yeah.
coming in and out.
Oh yeah. I want that riff. Like
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. I have my collection of guitars over here, and I'm thinking about da 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 da. I could just go figure that one out, just so I have
Yeah.
it. That's something that I would do, like warming up for a show or something like that.
Nice. Just to see that one person in the crowd that's just like, wait, am I here to watch Celebrity Deathmatch live? What's going on? If you can recreate that riff, Tony, I want to turn it into your ringtone when you call me.
Oh, that can be done. That can be very very easily accomplished.
Perfect. That's all I want. So good. So we're putting our lack of theme song, but still also quality introduction to get right into the action for this show. We're putting that in the Undertaker's coffin right now, and we're pushing it out of the arena. Which brings us now to our second title, to our second bout that we have. Let's fight with this animation. How are you feeling about this animation for Celebrity Deathmatch, Tony?
So it got better as the show progressed. Like we wound up watching 3 episodes from the show, two that were the official choices and one that I threw in kind of last minute, and it actually progresses across all 3. In the first episode, it's very crude claymation. It's the characters don't have perfectly defined features. They kind of get battered around a little bit, like a nose will change angles or something like that randomly. It's pretty slapdash. It's just it's not I always put it up against like Wallace and Gromit or something like what's the biblical one, the
Moral
dog and the
Oral?
boy, Moral Oral, the one that was based on too. What was the original?
Davy and Goliath.
Davy and Goliath. That's what it was. Yeah. So, and those were based on Davy and Goliath, and bringing those episodes. So, from animation style based on those, it started out far cruder, but it actually got to, by the time we watched the second episode, their hair had smoothed out. They had more defined facial features. I think just the resolution of the cameras they were using had gotten better, and the distribution had gotten better. So it was just clearer imagery. And then by the time they got to the third season, like, I don't know if you noticed this in that third episode, but like, the 2 characters, their hair color changed, and all of a sudden Johnny Gomez had like hair lines, like he actually like strips of hair that were kind of like, and so it got more and more defined as the series progressed. They didn't just lock into something and stick with that and never go anyplace better with it. So from an animation standpoint, it got better. It's still done extremely campy, I think, to the point that they can play up that it's just clay from the disclaimer,
Right.
that they can get away with doing that kind of stuff. But what do you think?
I really enjoy claymation, and I think it's very fun and endearing to watch some of these older episodes that we had, and see just how crude and weird they're put together. There's moments of this show that kind of always remind me of those California Raisin commercials.
Yeah.
But if California Raisins were super violent and murdering people, which I don't know that that's good for selling raisins.
I vaguely remember, I think they were on an episode of Celebrity Deathmatch, and they did, in fact, violently murder somebody.
It makes perfect sense that they would be on there. I love it. Probably versus like the Jolly Green Giant. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to see that little bit of jank that you had mentioned in sort of some of the stop motion, like the different angles of a nose, or sometimes eyes would go a little bit wonky, like to one side, and they'd get a little derpy, which was kind of funny. I don't know why I enjoyed it so much. I think that because it's claymation, I'm not saying that I'm giving it a pass in any way, shape, or form, but the fact that the energy of this show is so frantic and there's so much that's going on, it's not like they hover on a lot of these things for an extended period of time that we sometimes see with 2D animation. This really reminded me of an SNES video game that came out in the mid-90s that was called Clay Fighters. And it had sort of that same stop motion quality. This was still back when I was getting Nintendo Power in the early 90s, and
I was a Nintendo Power subscriber.
Yep. And so seeing something like this again immediately brought up memories and ideas of that. And when you were saying that it progressed in terms of those continual tweaks and improvements throughout the multiple cancellations of the show. What really kind of always defined this show for me was the fact that the back of the characters that you would see often that they had kind of look like weird balloon knots sometimes, like right behind, like between their shoulder blades, their base of their neck,
where they'd pinched them together to like
exactly
to complete the clay. Yeah.
And I don't know why, but I always thought that was really kind of funny and silly.
Yeah.
I mean, you could see that they had like stretch marks because they're clay and they're trying to move them and prop them in certain ways to punch and, brutally murder somebody that's in there. But it was interesting enough that some of the stuff, as it got better, I felt that it lost some of that original quality that I enjoyed from watching the jank and sort of the balloon knot shoulder blades and everything prior. I mean, even when you were saying about like the different styles of hair that we saw, like, I mean, it gets creepily better in that like third reboot or that later season that we saw, to the point where I was like, oh, why does Nick Diamond have breasts and why am I uncomfortable watching this now suddenly? But my final thought that I had on animation for it was that I loved the fact in one of the episodes that we talked about and we watched for this evening actually bridged that divide, as we've been talking about with 2D and sort of 3D clay animation, because we actually had two characters that came on that were at this time MTV properties that for some reason I don't even think that they were voiced by Mike Judge
they were Mike Judge.
Were they really?
Mike Judge. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Because I went through, I was actually very curious about who all the voice actors were to see who we knew. There was only two voice actors that I saw in there that I was familiar with. One was Chris Edgerly that we mentioned earlier, who took over for Mills Lane, and Nick Diamond. He voiced Peter Potamus on one of my favorite cartoon shows ever, Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law.
Harvey Birdman, yeah.
Hey,
Vince, you get that thing I sent you?
Yeah. Hey, you get that thing I sent you? Did you get that thing that I sent to you?
So, it's good to see that we have this. It's crazy to think that we have this moment where we're bridging the divide between 2D and claymation, and then having these MTV-owned properties of being Beavis and Butthead on this show, voiced by Mike Judge, then becoming claymation versions of themselves. And I thought that it was kind of fun. And to see the fact that we have claymation characters that are actually interacting with the 2D characters, such as when Mills Lane actually slaps Beavis and Butthead, and they respond accordingly. That, to me, I was like, that seems really cool. I was pumped about that.
And they picked up the pencil. They had the pencil weapons, like in the initial, like that they pick up. It's a 2D character holding onto a 3D object. And so it's not overly tricky. It obviously can be done, but it's a decent amount of effort put into that to making that work. And so I thought it was impressive. I was trying to figure out how they did it, and in my mind, what they probably did was they probably had like little, the equivalent of like the green screen guy,
little stand-in characters,
and then they just animated. He just drew over the top of it to create the characters, so that they would all match up. But it was impressive in so much as the actual movements of the animated characters, of the 2D characters, matched what it would have been on the show Beavis and Butthead.
Yeah.
So it felt everything matched up.
Yeah. No, I agree. It was a really cool and interesting thing to see, and it's definitely why I picked this episode.
Yeah.
I mean, you think of all of the MTV properties that were coming to fruition that we've even talked about tonight, Road Rules, all these different reality television shows.
16 pregnant.
16 again. I don't think that was A. I don't think they're gonna put them in Celebrity Deathmatch to fight, and B. I don't think that was
bullshit
on television yet.
They would put them in. They would have one of them have the baby, and then they would use the baby as a weapon in the fight. That's
okay. You know what?
I can almost guarantee you.
I'm actually gonna agree with you on that. I'm giving them way too much credit in terms of how they would actually act and behave in this. You're 100% right. They would
not be that respectful. They have the disclaimer to protect them from all the insanity. That airtight legal disclaimer.
I mean, come on, guys. It's just clay. Yikes. I don't think that that's a legal defense that should be ever used by any lawyer. But this is kind of, I mean, it's fun to see this, and I love the fact that for this 2D to claymation, I don't think that watching some of the early episodes, I didn't have a crazy expectation that they would do something as complicated or as intricate as that transition from Beavis and Butthead on a 2D cell drawn animation into the claymation realm. So to actually see when that transition happens, I was really super pumped. I was like, oh, that's above and beyond what I had expected this show to actually accomplish from a technical feat.
Right.
So yeah. But we've been talking a lot about a couple of these characters that are on here, and we have a couple. I mean, every episode has a lot of has at least 2 to 3 different fights or bouts that we have. But we have a lot of reoccurring characters, and we've talked about a couple being Nick Diamond and Johnny Gomez. We have 2 other reoccurring characters. Well, actually, maybe 3 to 4 other reoccurring characters. We should talk about, obviously, that we have the High Priest of Whoop Ass, Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Is that actually a name for him?
Yeah, they actually. On the first episode that we watched tonight. That's actually how they introduce him. Is the High Priest of Whoop Ass.
All right.
And then we have a whole kind of cadre of different female interviewers that we have that changes over time from season to season, and so it's sort of interesting. Out of all these characters, did you have a favorite, Tony?
Mills Lane, hands down. Mills Lane. Mills Lane is voiced by the actual Mills Lane in the initial handful of episodes, as John mentioned, up until his stroke. And Mills Lane's an interesting guy. He actually was a professional boxing referee for a number of years. And I mean, he lives in that spectrum for me of well-known officiates for sport, like right up there next to Ed Guns Hockley, who just retired from the NFL as an NFL referee. And somebody who is a character in their own right, not just from this show. I knew who he was before watching this show as a junior high kid. I'd seen a couple boxing matches, and I was aware of who Mills Lane was, and so when they actually had him, I had never heard his voice before, so I thought it was somebody doing like a cartoon variation on his voice, only to discover later it's actually his voice. But then you dive into this guy. He was a district court judge in Nevada for 2 terms.
Really?
Yeah, he's actually a very accomplished person in his own right, and I say that actively because as of us recording this, Mills Lane is in his 80s. He is still alive, despite the stroke. So good on him. But no, he's by far my favorite character, mostly because they use him in so many ways. Like I don't know that if that meets our legal or our rule standards. They'll say lines like that, and Mill's like, "I'll allow it." Like just him saying "I'll allow it" is one of my favorite. Just kind of like let this progress. Yes, that's the yes and right there.
I agree. I love the Mills Lane character. I think he's the best. And having gone to school in Pittsburgh, I was towards the very end of the career for Myron Cope, who was the Pittsburgh sports announcer during that time. And I had watched a lot of boxing and stuff like that when I was a kid. It was a big thing that my dad was always into, so I was always watching it as well. So to see somebody like Mills Lane, actually participating in doing this as himself, and Stone Cold Steve Austin as himself, was like this weird confluence of all of these things of 90s wrestling that I was into, and boxing and fighting that I was a big fan of. And so I think it's really cool that they had the ability to kind of pull in some of that talent. And like you said, those lines of like, let's get it on, or like, I'll allow it. Like that to me, that was so awesome to see him kick off fights like that.
It's sad to me that your audience doesn't get to actually see us having this conversation, because they wouldn't see us both doing like the trying to get the semi driver to honk the horn, like fist pump motion for every single one of these lines. Because I just realized we both did that like completely subconsciously.
I almost don't think you could do it. I don't think you could say it without making "let's get it on." Yeah. Oh man. So we have our 2 main announcers, Nick Diamond and Johnny Gomez, that we have talked about. And did you have a favorite out of these 2? Or I'll even throw Stone Cold into the mix. Out of these 3.
I mean, they all serve a very unique purpose. Because it's really it really they follow the exact rubric of how actual sports announcers are done. There's usually somebody who is the play by play person. That's
Right.
the Johnny Gomez character.
Johnny Gomez.
Then they have somebody who's a color commentary person who's just there to throw in the like little animated line to go along with it. I think John Madden's still my favorite one of all time, just because his stuff was just so zen perfect for football. It's like, see what this guy wants to tackle this guy. Like, oh
Yeah.
really? That never occurred to me.
Oh,
John.
thanks a lot, Captain Obvious.
And they play that up to effect with Nick Diamond, that he just gets the
Right.
dumbest lines in so many cases. He's the one who's just kind of absent-minded, and he brings his kid on a few episodes.
Yeah,
It's just
that's right.
and then Stone Cold is there to be the authority on the subject. Like,
Right.
you have the two guys that are there just to kind of say what they think about it, and then you've got the guy who knows this world and
Right.
can provide very detailed insight as to, that's the recent player, that's the Troy Aikman in the spot, who's able to kind of speak from that level.
Yeah, he's the subject matter expert on
Yeah.
wrestling during that time, and I think your breakdown is spot on. I like Nick Diamond for his excitable stupidity.
Yeah.
And
He dives deep into it's a good character. I will say though, honestly, I don't think this show works without Johnny Gomez.
yeah, I don't think it does either. I think,
you
you have
can change
to have,
out the others, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's that straight man mentality, like where
Right.
you have to, in order to set up some of the chaos, you have to have a grounded person like Johnny Gomez, to actually begin to set up and provide that structure, that scaffolding for the rest of the show. Because then once it's established that he is the professional, he can delegate out crazy tasks to Nick Diamond, like we saw tonight about
Like, go down to hell.
like go down to hell and resurrect dead boy bands that have been killed on other episodes and put that together. And so it's you can let Nick Diamond's character become that weird individual. As we mentioned in later episodes, he has breasts.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't watch an actual episode where they explain and they talk about it. It was in the episode, like the one of the newer episodes that we had watched for this evening. But he's talking about the fact that, like, we're new and improved and we're bigger and better, and like he's continually trying to show off more uncomfortable clay cleavage. I don't know. I could have done without that, but at the same time, he's the wild card. He is the true wild card in this. And so I know that you're saying it can't really happen without Johnny Gomez. I actually think that sort of this trifecta that they have for all these reasons, wild card, the straight man to set up everything, and then the subject matter expert, they're like a weird celebrity deathmatch holy trinity that sort of makes the whole show happen.
Mm-hmm. And they are a light touch on Stone Cold. He's not around constantly. One of the episodes we watched, he even serves more as the ringside commentator.
Yeah, which was not great.
Not great. But normally that falls to, at least for the first couple seasons, Stacey Cornbread. They kill off her character during the course of the series and replace her with Debbie Matenopoulos, played by Debbie Matenopoulos, who is actually I can't remember what sports she's done, but she's actually an announcer and is in the sports commentary world. And then wind up replacing her after the comeback with this Tally Wong character that they just pull out of nowhere. And then have even Marv Albert for a couple of the pilot episodes.
I wanted to bring that up. Marv Albert was for those first two, the January 1st and then the Super Bowl 32. He was the announcer that they had, and it's weird because the first episode had a fight in it that was between Charles Manson and Marilyn Manson.
Yeah.
Where Marilyn Manson rips out the entire skull and like spinal system and skeletal system of Charles Manson with like a finishing move that he calls like the Tunisian like skull ripper or death move. It was one of those things where I was like, wait, does everybody get like their own Mortal Kombat style finishing move for this? But it's bonkers to say the least. And so when they reference and have flashbacks for some of those moments, you always will see Marv Albert's character in there. If you're not familiar with Marv Albert, he is not a great individual. Sportscaster for a lot of year, terrible person in terms of sexual assault allegations that were brought against him. Just pretty much the worst.
Yeah,
But
I think that the only other time, the only thing I will give him is in the movie Trainwreck.
That he's not an actual train wreck.
Yeah, well, he's hysterical. He is kind of a train wreck because that whole intervention scene with Marv
right.
Albert and Matthew Broderick. So that's but that's the only thing I can think of for Marv Albert that is super positive in the last few years. And he's not even voiced by himself for this. This is somebody else doing a Marv Albert impression for it. And semi half-assed one at that.
It's a yikes. But anything else you can think about characters? I know we keep talking about some of the plots for some of these episodes. I want to make sure that we get into this so that we can talk about some of these fights because
they're good about continuity of character to the point where one of the episodes we watched was the fight between Oprah and Rosie O'Donnell, and then one of the later episodes after they come back after the hiatus, their super fan gets a gift, and the gift is Rosie O'Donnell's head. It's like severed head.
Yep.
and so they have some continuity to go along with that, and they will bring some characters back. There's at least a couple characters I think that get multiple matches that people try and knock them off, but like nobody can beat them over and over again. And so those are impressive that they kept that continuity throughout. But other than that, no other characters that really stand out as amazing to me. I think the celebrity matches, which we're going to get into in a second, they all have a certain amount of consistency as far as insanity of the characters and kind of divorcing from reality. They'll use some topical jokes, but otherwise,
a lot of it was stereotypes, bad celebrity tropes, and then things that may have been in the news and the media within maybe the last couple months that were hinting at, like when we talk about Liam and Noel Gallagher, like all of it is just them being British and drinking, and that's it. That,
and
I mean,
fighting
that's literally
one another, which is all that most people knew about them.
Which was the only topical thing that they could really pull from. So it's interesting. For tonight, we watched season 1, episode 2, Where is Stallone? Which is a question I ask myself every day. Followed by season 3, episode 25, which is Fandemonium 3, which, hey, is Listener Appreciation Month. We're obviously going to do Fandemonium. We've done our own fan casts, which we probably should now just start calling Fandemoniums, which I'm 100% interested to see if that's not a copyrighted word, so we can take that back and make that something that's ours. So we talked about Fandemonium, and then we watched season 5, episode 1, just to kind of see some of the difference in terms of the animation, as Tony and I have been talking about. Mm-hmm. And so I want to bring up and note that for the Where is Stallone episode, we had Oprah versus Rosie O'Donnell, Liam versus Noel Gallagher, and then we had Stallone versus Schwarzenegger. For the episode that we had for Fandemonium, we had Beavis versus Butthead, and then we had an interstitial followed by Backstreet Boys versus NSYNC, which is what we're going to close out tonight's episode chatting about. Mm-hmm. And then for season 5, episode 1, we had Tony Hawk versus Bam Margera, and then I don't really even know how this episode ended. It would just seem like it was everybody versus Don Vito.
Yeah, and that's something that's interesting, is that you're mentioning in the first episode, and it was like there was not a single one of those matches that was not somehow interrupted by somebody else coming into it, and that's something that they have as a consistent theme, which is very much pulled from the professional wrestling world of the big match between two people, and they can't leave it alone. Somebody's got to come running into the match and interrupt it or toss something into the ring or something like that. So for Rosie and for Rosie O'Donnell and Oprah, they've got Jerry Springer comes flying in, and for what were the other ones for
the Gallagher brothers, or for Stallone and Schwarzenegger?
For the Gallagher brothers, fucking Gallagher comes running out. Gallagher, the Hammer comic. Just puts an end to it for no reason. I feel like that was the writers just being like, we don't know who would win in a fight. How about neither of them?
Yeah.
And even for Stallone and for Schwarzenegger, they have Stallone's stunt guy is the one that shows up in the ring at the start of it. So
Right.
every single one of them had somebody else that ends up in the ring at some point in time related to it. And that's something that they use a lot. You mentioned Don Vito for the Bam Margera episode.
Right.
They play that one up. Voiced by John DiMaggio. That was the other
That's what I
voice
thought.
that I
Yeah.
recognized, and he's basically doing like Bender speaking gibberish. Like,
Yep.
it's exactly what Don Vito sounds like on that.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy, to again, as we've mentioned, the only real voice cast that we have that's in here is Mills Lane and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Other than that, everybody else is just, bad impressions, with the
Right.
exception of Mike Judge doing Beavis and Butthead in this. Everybody else is bad, terrible impressions from some notable voice actors, but then also probably people that that were around in the studio that they were like, hey, how good of a Rosie O'Donnell impression can you do right now? They're like, probably pretty terrible. They're like, perfect. Mic him up, get him in the
Yeah.
booth.
I feel like they did pull a lot of people in from like whoever was in the hallway, because the voice cast, or the cast for this, when I read through it, for only 75 however many episodes, it's 315 different voice actors, and that's even with some playing multiple characters throughout the run
Yeah.
of the series, all the way down to the guy who founded the Onion, Scott Dickers, who I actually saw a talk with recently and got to meet, voiced Jerry Seinfeld for an episode.
Oh, yeah, that's
Like, it's amazing, and he is not Jerry. Like, the guy's personality, everything, it doesn't match up to that. So they're all just as bad impressions as I think they could get, while still being passable as that character.
So, with all of these passable characters, barely passable characters, and all of the fights that we saw tonight, was there anyone that like stood out in your head that you were just like, that was a great representation of what celebrity deathmatch is?
Easily in sync and Backstreet Boys.
Okay,
The fact that they have to be pulled
But
back.
we're gonna get back. We'll get to Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, but with the exception of those two, anything that stood out to you is like, this is a prime example of this show.
Oh,
It's a hard one because there's so much weird stuff in this.
there is. I don't know that one stands out above the rest. I think, if anything, I would probably say the Gallagher fight probably would stand out, just because it's actually, no, I'll take it back. I'll go for the Nicole Richie and Paris Hilton one.
Okay, that's
because
right.
Because that one, they do spend a good amount of time throwing in the cultural zeitgeist things. Like, there's a scene where Paris like gets kind of tossed backwards against the ropes, and her legs are both up and spread, and there's conveniently like one of the ropes blocking between her legs, and somebody one of the announcers says something about, that reminds me that I need to shave my car.
Bald. Like, yeah.
I mean, to shave my
No,
car.
he says, that reminds me that I need to wax my car completely bald.
That's what it was. Yeah.
It really, I think that's what makes this show so fun, is if there is more information, and we are of course talking about the paparazzi photo that was taken of Paris Hilton as she was getting out of a car, where she was exposed, which not a great thing to have, but something obviously that is out there in sort of our cultural understanding of Paris Hilton in that period where she had fame and celebrity.
Right.
I guess she still does now. I don't know. You just really don't see very much from her.
No, but I did notice, like, Nicole Richie is apparently doing far better in life now that she is separated from Paris
exactly, which not a terrible thing.
No.
So, really kind of, I think, pulling that information, and obviously the more that celebrity or that person has been in the spotlight, it gives them much more fuel to be able to fan the flames for these matches, which is why the Stallone versus Schwarzenegger fight was sort of like that real key, spot on, perfect example of just how crazy. Yeah, for me, they're both obviously notable actors in the action kind of adventure movie realm.
Mm-hmm.
They've been around and they've had successful careers for decades.
Yeah.
And so between them, there's a lot to pull from. There's a lot of movie catchphrases and everything that they can possibly put in. But I love the fact that they built up the hype. You know, when we're talking about wrestling and we're talking about theatrics and we're talking about, how involved they're getting the fans, they build up this Stallone versus Schwarzenegger fight saying like, oh, Stallone's not here. If he doesn't show up, not going to be able to have this fight. And so they bring on a house band for 2 seconds called Toxic Fox, which again really had a fun guitar riff, but a crazy California Raisins vibe. Because they're all moving in unison and like syncing up and just kind of headbanging at the same time.
That was the half-ass cheap animation piece for them to throw together. Yeah.
But it filled in probably that like 30 to 60 seconds that they needed to round out and make it a full episode. Right. They're like, yeah, just put Toxic Fox in. We've had those characters back there for a while. Don't worry. Because they have absolutely no relevance to the rest of the episode. And I don't think we probably ever see them in another episode again. Unless they're needed for some type of a filler. But we have Arnold making comments about, Last Action Hero. He's like, I guess Arnold truly is the last action hero. And you're just like, okay. At some point they
Sloan having some trouble shedding those Copland pounds.
that was actually something that for me was really interesting, because in that first episode, we have Oprah versus Rosie O'Donnell, and we have two women who have been in the spotlight for years. And I will say this, and I don't think it's anything that's controversial. Like, they both have been very public about their weight and about how sometimes, it can fluctuate. Totally fine. They seem to make a lot of weight-obsessed comments in their match, which I was like, okay, that's fine. And then bringing up the stuff with Stallone about trying to shed, like, Copland pounds, I was like, all right. Yeah. I'm glad I didn't appreciate as a fat kid. I don't love weight jokes, and it's low hanging fruit sometimes for people. It's fine given whatever the controversy and sort of their public discussion that they were having about stuff. I mean, I still love the fact that Oprah, like last year, had that commercial where it's just like, I love bread. I love bread. I eat it every day, and regardless of what your opinion is about Oprah, which I love her as a human being and a celebrity, I think she's fantastic. That was that moment where I probably related to Oprah more than I ever have before in my life. I was like, oh fuck, I love bread too, and so does Oprah. We're like one and the same.
We're basically the same person.
We're basically the same person. But I mean, but like to see some of those come up every once in a while, I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I know that this is all exaggerations and parody and satire for this, which I'm fine. I love the fact that then they get into the movie franchises that they're referenced in the fight. Stallone gets cut on the arm, and then he like gunpowder and Rambo's it, which is super fun. We get Arnold, becoming the Terminator at some point. And then probably my favorite moment has to be in this match with Mills Lane, where he's talking to Stallone's body has exploded at this point.
Right.
Thanks to a rocket that I guess Commando style, Terminator style, Arnold has shot at Stallone, who catches it with his bare hands and then blows up.
He goes, oh, this is not safe. Why are you doing that?
Yeah. But like, and I'll be honest with you, I love bad Stallone impressions. That's also why I think this is my favorite match out of all of this. Like when it was, hey, sorry, man, the traffic was real bad. It's just, that makes me laugh for some reason so stupid hard that I could have watched Stallone just continue to do fights where he's like, hey, what am I doing right now? Is this the match thing? Oh, okay. I don't know why it tickles me and delights me to no end. So we have this moment where Stallone has exploded and Mills Lane is talking to his feet with the bones sticking out. And he's like, are you okay, Stallone? Can you hear me? Are you all right to keep fighting? And in that moment, that was the cool thing, is that they bridged and they merged some of the action franchises where you have Stallone become a Terminator 1000, a T-1000, and then like sync back up with that liquid metal, and they continue to have the fight. And like that was fun. At some point, Don King is in there, and his hair lights on fire. Yeah, they do a really good job of just kind of, allowing those two celebrities with rich histories to kind of take the spotlight and have fun with poking fun at them. And even to the point where Stacey Cornbread at the end is just like, hey, Arnold just goes, ow, my back. Like, which is
one message
bad
to all my fans. Ow, my back.
And then we have Stacy being like, "Hey, give my best to Maria." And I was like, "Ooh, given more
Recent
current news, I was
news.
like, that's a stinger. Ouch."
There's some of these that I cringed a little bit and stuff that happened that wound up happening later to go along with it. Just to see how some people rise and some people fall.
Ugh, but you're all the same inside of the Claymation Celebrity Deathmatch.
This is true. The Great Equalizer.
Yeah, the Great Equalizer. Speaking of the Great Equalizer, let's get into this main event, this Fandemonium match that we have been talking about. Backstreet Boys versus NSYNC.
Oh yes.
Tony, what stood out for you as being crazy in this fight?
Oh well, they gave us so I think my favorite is still the Voltron type assembly of
Okay. Of the Backstreet
of
Boys?
the Backstreet Boys. Yeah,
What?
that's Kevin Richardson. I think is the one who's like the only one who's not now with them in their like new revived version. I happen to know that for a very stupid specific for reason.
Nobody's judging you. We're
I-
all judging Tony.
I helped out with some friends that did a video for the YouTube series, and
Oh, okay.
they actually got selected, and then that episode got scrapped because of the sexual assault allegations against one of the Backstreet Boys.
Yeah.
So they never actually aired on YouTube, which sucks. But at any rate, so if you want to go look that up, feel free to go do so. Look up Party Like It's. You can find the video. I filmed it. But at any rate, so Kevin Richardson, the who's the old guy in the group, they like two of them, their jaws unhinge. Actually, all four of them, their jaws unhinge, and they all like accept his arms and legs into their mouths, and then they become like these giant like scissor hands and scissor feet.
Yeah.
And then this helmet comes in and snaps on over his head, like, Power Rangers Voltron, whatever you want to see. But it's just great to see those things like, oh yeah, that's in Voltron, the two lions. It's their mouths that they're like shoving this other character's limbs into in order to create them. And so that's how they do it. It's beautiful. It's horrendous and beautiful.
It was the most uncomfortable but rewarding Voltron assembly that I've ever seen. It's crazy. I mean, to give you some context, when they start out this episode, they're talking about the fact that like the main title bout for Fandemonium 3 is the Backstreet Boys versus NSYNC. To which Johnny Gomez has to remind Nick that they've died in past episodes. Both boy bands are deceased in terms of the continuity of this show. So how is Nick going to deliver on this? Because he's been the one that's been tasked with doing this. And so Nick, at some point, sacrifices the number one fan for this show, who was a winner of the Tor and Gore, and named Nick Kamerman.
Yeah.
He throws him into a toilet, which is a portal to hell at this point, which I think this was probably the craziest thing for me, is that in this moment, the devil appears in the bathroom, and Nick is like, "Hey, could I have some help with resurrecting these?" And the devil's like, "You know what? I actually feel like I owe you a favor, because you've been sending all these people down to hell that have died on Celebrity Deathmatch. I feel like, you know what? If you need this, I'll bring them back up and you can have them for the fight." And so...
But you gotta give me somebody in return.
You gotta give me somebody in return, which is why Nick Kramerman ends up getting thrown into hell, into a toilet portal, which allows both of these boy bands to come back.
Yeah.
So then they have this crazy... Now, leading up to the moments of this uncomfortable Voltron, we have all the Backstreet Boys take off their shoes to reveal that all of the primping and all of the cosmetics that have gone into them looking beautiful and television and movie and fame ready, they have neglected to cut their toenails, which are just like giant raptor talons at this point, which then one of them puts on and dons kind of like a head helmet, which they all bite and attach onto it and
Instead
spin
of holding
around
with their hands, they bite onto it with their mouths.
They bite onto it with their mouths, and they form what's called the pinwheel of death, which like cuts up and scratches all the Backstreet Boys, which then has the Backstreet Boys turning into this Voltron robot. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know. The end of this match, I mean, was it a satisfying fight for you knowing who the winner is?
Are we not giving away for
No, let's give it away.
I mean,
look, it's been out for like what, 20 years now at this point. Like there's no spoilers of this.
I mean, I did find it interesting that so not all members of both boy bands survive. All of Backstreet Boys winds up getting electrocuted and charred into these little corpses. The Voltron thing falls apart and they just become a pile. I don't know how that falls apart. That was the interesting one to me. I would have liked that reverse sequence.
Yeah.
They wind up getting electrocuted by a couple of the NSYNC guys. Joey Fatone from the NSYNC guys gets like his head smashed into a wall and like knocked off, but the rest of the NSYNC guys wind up surviving in the end of it, which I find interesting. So of all of them, he's actually done so with his career since then. Like nobody's done as well as Timberlake, but he out of the rest, he's the one that seems to be doing the best. Yet he's killed off from it. So in retrospect, doesn't necessarily fit, but no, it was satisfying enough. I don't know how you end that in any other way. At that point in time, I think NSYNC was the one that was still doing better. Obviously, they've done far better in the long run with the solo career. Just far more popular artists in general. I still think at some point you may see them do like a full reunion. That would not surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, as long as there's money and nostalgia that's out there, we've seen that nostalgia really kind of tends to be one of those things that gets people to open up their wallet. So I would 100% believe that Backstreet Boys and NSYNC would just go on tour together, probably when they're in their 50s, and then just try to like cash out as a big cash grab.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey guys, let's not make that happen in a couple years. Let's try hard to kind of just keep everything where it is right now. I don't necessarily need that in my life.
Let's get back to cartoons.
Oh man. Well, we are now at the end of our title bout that we had for tonight. Mm-hmm. Any other comments that you have about Celebrity Deathmatch, Tony?
Celebrity Deathmatch, if you weren't steeped in pop culture at the time when this was released, I don't think you're going to get the same punch out of it. But if you knew what was going on in pop culture, all this will stand out. What is creepy, interesting, weird for me now is now reviewing these matches and then doing the kind of the follow-up exercise to see what happened to all these characters. I mean, the Don Vito one, we barely even mentioned it with showing up in the fight between Tony Hawk and Bam Margera. Don Vito, who was the character on Bam Margera's Viva La Bam, that was his uncle. I think it was his uncle, but it shows up very regularly. Has since actually passed away and had a very kind of sad end to his life. And just to see kind of how he was depicted in the show, it colors it a little bit. And to know kind of where these characters and these people have actually ended up in their real lives. They make a joke with the Stallone and Schwarzenegger fight that studios couldn't afford to get them both in a movie together, and then they both end up in Expendables 2 together. Like, you know,
I forgot about that.
And not only that, in Expendables 1, Stallone and Stone Cold are both in that one too. So
that's right.
You know, so that there's that tie together. So that, but just to see where these people have actually ended up, it changes how you watch them. The Marv Albert things, you know, the just stuff that comes out in the future. And so it's interesting watching this stuff in that reverse lens. But if you only had current pop culture to go by, this show's not gonna sit particularly well. You're not really gonna understand a whole lot of what's going on.
I agree. But before we get your recommendation, hey, guess what? You listening right now, yeah. Oh my God, do you have opinions and you love to put them on the internet? And so we're going to honor that fact by now handing this over to longtime listener and friend of the show, Bobby Anthem, for this week's Love It or Hate It. Bobby, take it away.
Yeah, Bobby.
This week's Love It was written by some dude TMB on April 17th, 2003. The post is titled, "If you want to see celebrities die in a comical way, this is for you." And it says, "Celebrity Deathmatch is what you could call like professional wrestling, but with a whole lot more blood, decapitations, and laughs with the same thrill of wanting to know who would reign victor in the ring. With over 300 episodes, many of your favorite and lesser-known celebrities end up on their claymated deathbed. This claymation is really a must-see. It's really entertaining to see two celebrities I do not like beat themselves with weapons and their own fists, and occasionally both dying in the ring. Even though it's disappointing to see the better celebrity get killed, I still watch this for the fun of it. And our hate it comes from the Simple Man 89, who in a post on March 3rd, 2007 titled, "New Celebrity Deathmatch Sucks," said, "The new Celebrity Deathmatch is terrible. They kill off the popular people and make the low-budget celebs win. I mean, Andy Milonakis, Lil Flip and Lil Wayne should have both died. Lil Flip sucks. The fight between Lil Jon and Lil Bow Wow and Lil Flip was mad corny and short. They should have just killed off all of them. Why did Toby lose to Jake and Christian lose to Adam? They are better actors and superheroes. They also spend too much time on talking rather than fighting, which can bore the viewers. Everything seems rushed for some reason. They can't just make a long fight. The old death match is way better. 3 out of 10.
I kind of want Bobby to be a Mills Lane for the wrestling match that I want to create, like the celebrity death match that I want. I want Bobby Anthem to replace the Mills Lane character. I could 100% see that. And I already know that Bobby loves wrestling. So this isn't like a far cry for him to get involved in it.
Are there any listeners out there who know claymation? If you would like to claymation, I don't know, would you claymate something for us to voice? I would be happy to be the Stone Cold Steve Austin character too.
There we go.
Sean and Dave's of Johnny Gomez and Nick Diamond. I'm sure we could probably get Mel to be our Stacey Corbett. and then we can put some characters in the ring and definitely have Bobby be the Mills Lane for it.
It goes along the lines with our target of our 2018 campaign of get Bobby Anthem animated. So we are always pushing for that.
Yes.
But Tony, I want to check and see. It's time for our recommendations. First, you can recommend this or you cannot recommend this. And if you don't recommend it, do you want to give it the dip from Roger Rabbit, which erases it from the annals of cartoon history forever until we at least figure out a device to be able to allow people to vote and bring them back from the dead?
Oh, hell no. I recommend this. I think this is definitely worth watching. Luckily, a good amount of it seems to be available on Daily Motion. Some of it is also the revived version is actually available, I think, through iTunes and through Amazon Prime. So you can still get some of that stuff. And I would say the later stuff are the things that are better quality than the original ones. But yeah, especially if you have that anchor in pop culture from that day, I think it's still entertaining to watch. And if anything, it's a nice walk down memory lane of, oh, I wonder whatever happened to that person that was a big star in 1999 that I don't remember seeing in the past 2 decades, you know? So no, I recommend it. I think it's worthwhile viewing for those that know what they're watching.
Great.
How about you?
I'm going to recommend this as well. I think that you hit it spot on. If this was something that you had watched or that you grew up with MTV during this point in time, if you have a decent interest in celebrity and sort of, who was popular or what was happening in the zeitgeist at that time, this show is still interesting. And like you said, there are these little nuggets that kind of make you want to go and explore where that person has gone after, 15, 20 years from this show originally airing. And that's kind of fun to see sort of where everybody is. It's like a weird high school reunion with people that you don't know, and you're like, you know what? I don't want to measure myself against them, and I don't honestly care, but it's still kind of crazy to see this.
Is that really a weird high school reunion, or is that just a high school
I think
reunion?
it's just a high school reunion. Yeah, right? But I think this is fun. I actually would say that I would put this on probably more often. I found that this could be... I watched a couple of the episodes and I just had them on sometimes like in the background. Like I would just let Daily Motion run. And this is kind of a fun show, like kind of wrestling. You don't always have to pay attention 100% of the time. There can be moments where you sort of snap in and then you snap back out depending on what you're doing. This could be a show that I use as like white noise or background music whenever I'm working like during the day, just to kind of see what characters they're bringing in, because to have 3 fights in every episode, or at least 2 fights in every episode, there's a lot going on, and they go through it relatively quickly. And that was fun for me, is that they didn't really seem to dwell too much on anything particular. They had really bad, sappy puns and jokes every once in a while, but that was fine, you know, because they never hovered on it for too long. I don't think they ever took themselves too seriously, which is kind of how I feel about this show. Like, I'd recommend it. I wouldn't give it like a serious, like, go out and watch it right now. But if this is something that you remember, definitely go back and check it out. I think it still kind of holds up. It's still fun to kind of see some of these things, like the Beavis and Butthead episode. That stuff's great. So recommend for me.
Nice.
Yeah, great.
So two thumbs up.
Yeah. Hey, Cody, you made a great recommendation.
Well done. And it wasn't even that much of a recommendation. It was more of a question. Does this actually meet the qualifications? And you know what? It does. And it gets recommended.
Yes.
So if you're not sure if it meets the qualifications, submit it and do it in the same way that Cody did, and it will probably get the 2 thumbs up. That's a complete lie. I don't know what Dave thinks of this. He could be completely against this one, but you know what? He's not here, so we get to have fun with it.
Well, I want to thank you, Tony, so much for coming on the show today, for talking about everything.
My pleasure.
Always great to have you on here, buddy. Always good to talk to you. Where can the people find you, and anything that you have coming up that you'd like to let everybody know about?
Yeah, so a couple things. I'll Crowded Elevator, writer, director, editor, all that wonderful stuff. Working with Sean and a bunch of wonderful people in the DC area. You can find our stuff at crowdedelevatorpictures.com. Got a bunch of cool videos up there. Also, I recently started classes at Second City Film School, the Harold Ramis Film School up here in Chicago. And so one of the things I started to go along with that is a podcast. That podcast is called the Film Student Podcast. You can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, all the wonderful spots. Many of the same places you get Saturday Morning Cartoons. You can probably find mine. You can also find us at filmstudentpod.com, on Twitter and Instagram at filmstudentpod.
I would definitely say that I am a fan myself of Film Student Pod, especially. I want to thank you for the shout out that we get in episode 1. It was
you get
really
a couple
awesome
of them
to kind of
throughout
see.
the series.
Yeah. It's kind of always funny to see about people who are in film, who are working, just sort of what their creative influences were. And guess what, guys? A lot of it goes back to cartoons that people have watched when they were younger. So it's bananas.
Cartoons come up. That's a through storyline that shows up quite a bit.
So that's why we're here as a podcast.
Yep.
So, hey guys, you've heard Bobby Anthem twice on this show. If you're interested in what Bobby Anthem is up to, you can hear him on a paranormal podcast called the Inhuman Experience Podcast. You can find them on Twitter at IEXP_podcast, and they're available on Spreaker and SoundCloud. He's also the occasional third wheel and co-host on the THT Movie Review Podcast, which broadcasts every Saturday night at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Mixlr. And guys, you can find Bobby Anthem on Twitter at Bobby Anthem. Send him a message, show him some love. He is the absolute best. As for me, guys, I perform live improv comedy in Washington, D.C. with a group that's called Knox. That's NOX exclamation point. We perform with Washington Improv Theater. You can find tickets and times with dc.org. And I'm always on Twitter and Instagram at Sean Paul Ellis. If you're looking for Dave, you can find him on Twitter at Dr. ClawMD. You can also find his writings on Nerdist.com, Collider.com, and DaveTrumbore.com. As for this show, if you would be so kind and you want to support the show, you can head on over to our Patreon, patreon.com/Saturday Morning Cartoons. Chip in and support the show. Everyone, we greatly appreciate it. And just remember, Saturday morning, that's morning with the U. Head over to our website, SaturdayMorningCartoons.com. You can check out our Twitter at MorningTunes. You can see all the weird memes that I post on Instagram at Saturday Morning Cartoons, on IG. Keep the conversation going on Facebook, facebook.com/Saturday Morning Cartoons. And you can listen each and every week to SMC on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, and now Spotify, wherever fine podcasts are sold. If you want to suggest a cartoon like Cody or anybody else from this month, you can email us at SaturdayMorningCartoons@gmail.com. Tony, that is it for Listener Appreciation Month.
Woohoo!
We did it. We got all the way
appreciate
through.
that. We appreciate that. Thank you, listeners, for pitching in. This has been one hell of a fun month to both listen to and be a part of. So thank you, Sean, for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tony, so much for being here. And guys, we'll see you next time.
Hey, everybody. Thanks a lot for listening to Saturday Morning Cartoons. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to transform and roll out.